A genius teenager, put on trial for a crime he didn't commit, until he turned the courtroom into his classroom. Omari Gaines never really fit the mold of a typical teenager. While other kids his age spent their afternoons glued to video games or scrolling through social media, he was somewhere completely different, buried in textbooks, solving equations that left even his teachers scratching their heads. He lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, in a quiet, working-class neighborhood where everybody knew everybody. His mother, Sharon, worked long shifts as a nurse, and his father, Terrence, drove trucks cross-country, meaning Omari spent most of his time alone. But that was fine. He had his books, his online courses, and his dream to become an aerospace engineer. His mind worked differently, seeing patterns where others saw chaos, breaking down complex problems like a machine built for one thing, solving. Omari wasn't just smart, he was exceptional. The kind of kid professors invited to guest lectures. The kind of student college recruiters fought over. At just 17, he had full-ride scholarship offers from MIT, Stanford, and Georgia Tech. But he hadn't made his decision yet. He was still weighing his options, figuring out which program would push him the hardest. He wasn't looking for easy. He wanted greatness. Despite his intellect, he was still grounded, humble. He never bragged about his talent. Never flaunted his success. Instead, he used his gifts to help others. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, after finishing his own assignments, he would head to Price Hill Public Library, where he tutored college students in calculus, physics, and programming. Some of these students were 5, 6 years older than him, yet they listened to him like he was their professor. On this particular night, Omari had just finished a tutoring session that ran a little late. His last student, a struggling engineering major named Jordan, had been on the verge of giving up on his degree. But after a 2-hour deep dive into fluid dynamics, Omari saw a shift. Jordan left with a look of determination he hadn't arrived with. It was moments like these that made Omari proud, not just of his intelligence, but of what he could do with it. As he packed up his things and stepped out onto the dimly lit streets, he had no idea that tonight would change everything. Just as he turned onto the main road, the sound of screeching tires cut through the silence. Omari barely had time to process the sound before red and blue lights flashed behind him. A police cruiser rolled up fast, stopping just a few feet away. His heart didn't race. His breath didn't catch. Not yet. This wasn't the first time he'd seen cops in the area. He kept walking. Hands in his pockets. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Then came the voice. Sharp. Commanding. Hey! You in the hoodie. Stop right there. Omari turned, blinking against the bright headlights. A white officer stepped out of the car, the weight of authority pressing into every movement. His badge glinted under the streetlights. Dale Wickham. Omari stopped, his mind already running through possible scenarios. He wasn't doing anything wrong. His ID was in his pocket. His work schedule was in his bag. He even had tutoring notes with Jordan's name on them. He stayed calm. Respectful. Is something wrong, officer? Wickham didn't answer. He sized Omari up, like he was studying a suspect, not a kid walking home. Where are you coming from? The library. I tutor there. Wickham tilted his head. Skeptical. At this hour? It's only 9:30. Wickham took a step closer. His partner, a younger cop Omari hadn't noticed before, lingered by the car. His expression wasn't aggressive. Just quiet. Watching. You matched the description of a suspect from a robbery earlier tonight. There it was. The trap. Omari knew the game. He had seen it happen before. To friends. To neighbors. Vague descriptions. Baseless accusations. A cop looking for an easy arrest. But he wasn't going to play into it. I don't know anything about a robbery, Omari said. You can check my ID. I was at the library. He moved slowly, reaching for his pocket. Don't move. Wickham's voice exploded through the street. Omari froze. Both hands in the air. He could feel his pulse in his throat now. The younger cop shifted uncomfortably but didn't say a word. Wickham reached for his radio. I got him. Male. Black. Gray hoodie. Backpack. Bringing him in. Omari's stomach dropped. Bringing me in? For what? His voice was steady, but frustration crept in. I just told you where I was. You can call the library. You can check the security cameras. Wickham ignored him. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Omari took a step back. Not resisting. Just stunned. Sir, I didn't do anything. Wickham grabbed him. The rough yank nearly knocked him off balance. Before he could say another word, cold metal snapped around his wrists. Tight. Unforgiving. Omari sucked in a breath. He could feel people watching from windows. See the glow of a phone screen recording from a porch across the street. But none of that mattered now. Because no matter how smart he was, no matter how innocent, he was going to jail tonight. But what Wickham didn't know was that this wouldn't be just another easy arrest. Not this time. The ride to the Hamilton County Justice Center was silent. Omari sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, his brain moving faster than his emotions. He knew panic wouldn't help. He had to think. Wickham said he matched a suspect's description. That was a lie. There was no way they had a real suspect if he was arrested without so much as a question. And if they had evidence, they would have presented it by now. So what was the plan? Make an easy arrest. File some weak paperwork. Hope he pleaded guilty to avoid a drawn-out battle. Omari exhaled slowly. Not happening. When they reached the station, Wickham pulled him out of the car and led him inside. The room smelled like sweat and bleach. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A tired-looking desk sergeant barely glanced at him before typing something into a computer. Charges, the sergeant muttered. Resisting. Possible connection to a robbery, Wickham said casually. Like this was routine. Omari locked eyes with him. And for the first time, he saw it. A flicker of satisfaction. Wickham was enjoying this. The sergeant sighed. Holding or booking? Holding, for now. Omari was walked down a hallway lined with cells. A few men inside glanced up, uninterested. Wickham shoved him toward an open door. Cold concrete walls. A metal bench bolted to the floor. No clock. No way to tell time. The cuffs finally came off. But Omari didn't move. You get one call, Wickham said. Make it count. Omari rolled his wrists, blood rushing back into his hands. Then he looked up at Wickham. And did something the officer wasn't expecting. He smiled. It wasn't out of amusement. It wasn't even out of defiance. It was because he knew something Wickham didn't. He was about to dismantle him from the inside out. But first, he needed to make that call. Omari dialed the number with steady fingers. His mother answered on the second ring. Omari? Her voice was thick with exhaustion. She had just finished a shift at the hospital. Mom, I need you to listen carefully. I'm at Hamilton County Jail. I was arrested, but I didn't do anything. A sharp breath. What? Call Mr. Randolph. Tell him I need him here first thing in the morning. Mr. Randolph wasn't just a lawyer. He was a beast in the courtroom. A family friend who had spent decades defending people railroaded by the system. Omari had met him years ago at a community event, and they had talked for hours about law, logic, and the power of words. Now, that conversation was about to pay off. The next morning, Omari walked into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists bound in front of him. His mother was already in the first row. Her eyes dark with rage and worry. And next to her, dressed in a sharp gray suit, was Randolph. He barely glanced at Omari before turning his full attention to the prosecution's table. Wickham sat there, smug, flipping through his notes. This was just another open and shut case for him. Omari took a seat beside Randolph. The lawyer leaned in, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. "They think they got you, don't they?" Omari nodded. "They're wrong." Randolph smirked. "Good. Then let's take this apart, piece by piece." The judge entered. An older white man with an unreadable face. He adjusted his glasses, scanned the room, and cleared his throat. "Let's get started." The prosecutor wasted no time. "Your Honor, the defendant was arrested on suspicion of robbery and resisting arrest." He matched the description given by a witness at the scene. Randolph leaned back, completely unfazed. "And what was that description, exactly?" The prosecutor hesitated. Randolph lifted a brow. "Go ahead. Read it out." The prosecutor cleared his throat and read from the report. Suspect is described as a black male, late teens, wearing a hoodie and a backpack. Randolph let the words hang in the air. Then, he turned to the jury. "So, what you're saying is, the description could have fit half the black teenagers in Cincinnati?" The prosecutor shifted in his seat. Omari didn't blink. They were playing right into his hands. Wickham's jaw tightened. But he still looked confident. He hadn't realized yet that he was about to be picked apart, piece by piece. But that moment was coming. Wickham took the stand. Shoulders squared. Voice firm. He had done this before. He spoke like a man who believed the system was on his side. "I stopped the suspect because he matched the description provided by a witness at the scene," he stated, hands folded neatly in front of him. Randolph stood. Slowly. Letting silence stretch before speaking. "Officer Wickham, you're sure about that?" Wickham didn't flinch. "Positive." Randolph nodded. "And you followed standard procedures? Logged everything correctly?" "Yes." Omari sat still. Watching. Waiting. The real game was about to begin. Randolph turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit new evidence into the record." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." Randolph picked up a remote and pressed a button. A screen flickered on behind him. Security footage from Price Hill Public Library. The timestamp in the corner read 9:27 p.m. It showed Omari inside the library, bent over a desk, explaining something to a student. At the exact moment the robbery occurred. Miles away. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Randolph turned back to Wickham. "Officer, how could my client have committed a robbery when he was here, tutoring, at the same time?" Wickham blinked. His confidence cracked. Just for a second. But Randolph wasn't done. "Now, let's talk about your body cam footage." He picked up a folder and held it up. "You filed a report that states my client resisted arrest. That means your body cam should show clear evidence of that, correct?" Wickham's mouth twitched. Randolph's smile was sharp as a blade. "Play the footage." The screen changed again. The body cam footage began rolling. It showed Omari standing still. Hands raised. Speaking calmly. Then, suddenly, the video cut to black. A long, unnatural gap. Then it picked up again. Omari already in cuffs. Being shoved into the back of the squad car. Randolph turned to the jury. Letting them see it for themselves. Then, back to Wickham. "Officer, why is there a missing segment in your footage?" Wickham stiffened. Randolph leaned in. "Did you turn off your body cam, Officer Wickham?" Silence. Randolph took a slow step forward. "Because that's a violation of police procedure, isn't it?" Wickham's face darkened. But he said nothing. Randolph let out a short, satisfied breath. Your Honor, the defense moves to have all charges dropped immediately. The judge stared at the screen. His expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. Charges dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Wickham sat frozen. His career crumbling in real time. Omari stood. Wrists finally free. And looked directly at Wickham. I told you I didn't do anything. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Omari stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the past 48 hours pressing on his shoulders. His mother gripped his arm tight, a mix of relief and quiet fury in her eyes. But Omari wasn't angry. He was calculating. Because this wasn't just about him. Cameras flashed. Reporters called his name. But Omari ignored them. He had something more important to do. First, Randolph walked beside him, phone in hand. You ready to file? Omari didn't hesitate. Yes. Because Officer Wickham wasn't walking away from this untouched. Omari's lawsuit hit the department that afternoon. Unlawful arrest. Falsified report. Violation of police procedure. And then, the real fallout began. Wickham's body cam footage, or what was left of it, was pulled for review. The missing segment? A deliberate manual shutdown. A cover-up. A lie. By the end of the week, Wickham was under internal investigation. By the end of the month, he was fired. Omari didn't celebrate. He wasn't done. Because his story? It wasn't unique. For every Omari who got free, there were dozens who didn't. So he made a decision. His future was still in aerospace. But now he had another mission. He started a scholarship fund for wrongfully accused black youth. Raised awareness about false arrests. Spoke out about systemic bias. And slowly, people listened. He didn't just win. He made sure nobody else had to fight the same battle alone. Omari Gaines had always been a genius. But now, he was a force the system would never forget. Life isn't just about what happens to you. It's about what you do with it.